Image is a first-person horror game where you play as a child named Sam who fell asleep in front of the TV and witnesses some strange events. Full disclosure, this was a gift from the developer. Atmosphere. Image claims boldly at the start that it's meant to be completely random, but playing through the game twice led to the same experience twice. It's extremely linear to a fault. The atmosphere only activates when you're doing the right thing, and when it works, it manages to be pretty spooky and surreal. Lots of events feel weird and nonsensical, and some things do go on for too long, but it does work in the game's favour, creating a sense of apprehension as you go from one thing to the next. The problem is the scripting. The game grinds to a halt if you don't do exactly what it wants, and it's very unprepared for you to deviate even slightly from the intended path. Not that it tells you what the intended path is. If you don't do exactly the right thing or stand in exactly the right spot, the game waits until you do. This leads to several immersion-shattering moments where the game embarrasses itself in front of you, with enemies and scripted events hanging around awkwardly waiting for you to do the right thing. The atmosphere would have been pretty decent, but there's a lot of technical problems and confounding design that ultimately ruined it. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. The game's scares boil down to things flashing up on the screen and bewildering scripted events. The jump scares sometimes suffered from them activating when you weren't looking at them, which led to loud noises but nothing to see. When they did work, some were still only sometimes effective thanks to the immersion problems. The scripted events were the highlight and varied from terrifying to strange and confusing, with the house shaking like there's something huge pounding the roof, to the familiar orange-eyed figure that appeared several times throughout the game, whose effectiveness varied. The randomness of it worked really well to catch the player off guard and made examining them really fascinating for a while, but it felt like some of them were meaningless and didn't go far enough. The game has some good moments, but not enough to get the point. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The soundtrack was pretty good with some low, almost chanting voices and alien-sounding synths. There was a lot of silence that struggled to be eerie, but when the music tracks played, they did a great job helping the atmosphere where they could. The sound effects are of varying volumes and quality, with the footsteps sounding incredibly quiet and muffled, but effects like the house being pounded were actually really good with how thunderous they sounded, even if they did tend to clip the audio limits a bit. There wasn't any voice acting, just a repeating clip of laughing that didn't really change throughout, and whilst initially sort of creepy, it did become a bit cheesy with repeated use. Overall, the sound design with flaws was still functional and never really hurt the experience. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. There were some really nicely done trails of blood that were so thick and dark they looked like they were painted with a brush. There are some other gore-related things in the game, but they're not quite as memorable. Still, whilst there's not really any reason to include the gore, it didn't really feel out of place. That's two Harry Masons. Story. The game opens by telling you that it's 1994 and you're playing as little Sam who fell asleep in front of the TV waiting for his parents and sister. The game refuses to elaborate or explain anything else and doesn't really develop as time goes on. The events that take place seem unrelated from any kind of story unless there's symbolism that leads to something unexpected. The house was a central focus, but it was hard to tell if it really had any significance besides potentially being your house. The game flashes up some hanged corpses at one point or another, but thanks to the lack of story, it didn't really mean anything since it was never revealed who exactly they were. The game's goal is also to put items around a pentagram, but it's again not explained why this is significant or why you're even supposed to do it. The story is pretty much non-existent, but sets itself up to go somewhere at the start, but never does, making the final score 2 out of 5 Harry Masons. The game is about 40 minutes long and has some interesting scenes and some pretty ominous moments, but it was so heavily scripted that it leaves you mulling about trying to figure out which way to leave or progress. If it was more free form and allowed for more exits, had more events, or had more of a focus on exploration, its surreal nature might have had more room to grow or expand. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games. If you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I finished the pentagram, I didn't get the point and advise you probably won't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.